Betsy and Thomas here for the American Intelligence Media. Thomas, yesterday we were drilling down on the Mueller-Manafort unfolding drama in Washington, and I know you had so much more to say, and I cut you off at an hour, and folks were not very happy with that. So today let's open up, and I'm going to let you talk as long as you like.
I don't think you should do that, Betsy.
Well, actually, I think the people that are listening to you really don't care about, short 6 to 10 minute snippets. They really want to hear the deep truth. Plus, people really like the story you're telling because you're bringing it all in a picture that they can understand. So then when they go out and they see the headlines or the lack of headlines on the news, they can understand how it all fits in. So without further ado and without any interruptions, and go as long as you like, Thomas, take it away. Let's look at Manafort and Podesta today.
Well, Betsy, first I want to apologize to you. I got so carried away last time we were talking that first off, I backed up from the microphone because I was yelling. And I interrupted you over and over again. And that's
I was
because
screeching.
Well, we were in a war right now, okay?
Yes.
And I didn't get to the point. So we needed to have another one of these to continue it. And this one I think we should call something like lobby wars, or Manafort versus Podesta, because that's what's happening. And I didn't get to tell the story. I was trying to tell the backstory. Without the backstory, you can't understand what's going on. You cannot. You can read those indictments and you go, wait, these are the silliest things I've ever seen written. Is this a project for a civics class in high school? I mean, they make the most baseless accusations that are so tainted with judgments and opinions and non-fact that they are complete garbage. So we're talking about Manafort, Paul Manafort's and Rick Gates' indictments that came down from Mueller, as well as George Papadopoulos. And in a minute, I want to describe what really happened to Papadopoulos. So do not let me forget to tell you how it was that Comey set up Papadopoulos. Okay, but first, let's continue to frame this. Remember when Trump said, "There will be no lobbyists in my administration. No past lobbyists and no current lobbyists." Why? Lobbying is evil. He knows that. He has to deal with New York. New York, remember, is though Washington, D.C. may be the heart of the country, where the Kabuki theater and the, what I call theater, the absurd, is acted out for Americans as a Hollywood drama, just like Kevin Spacey, talking to Hillary Clinton as a joke, as a way to promote her. I mean, this is no joke. It is a Hollywood production and has been ever since Jimmy Carter, the White House, that is. So as we're looking at this, Trump said no lobbyists. Uh-oh, wait, massive incongruency. Then why did he allow Roger Stone? The number one lobbyist group is Roger Stone, Kelly, Paul Manafort, and Black. They're the Republican, usually. Horrible opposition, disinformation. They've even been called terrorists, domestic terrorists, or political terrorists, not domestic terrorists. So Manafort is the king of that. Roger Stone has now, something has happened to him. He is so desperate that he is over the edge some of the time. So remember, Roger Stone from 1990, that would have been 6, told Trump he should run for president. In 2000, he insisted Trump should run for president and continued up until the time that Trump ran for president. Now, why does Roger Stone want Trump for president? Because he figured he could control him. And when he talks about Trump, you actually hear him with extreme audacity say that he, really is in Trump's mind, or, is one with Trump, or he controls Trump or directs Trump. Well, he was always Trump's biggest supporter. And remember, he was the Republican oppositional research group, lobbyists, liars, counterintelligence. This is political counterintelligence. This is corporate intelligence. And he was one of the worst groups. And Paul Manafort, as we mentioned yesterday, helped put Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush into the presidency. And as everyone knows, I thought that he was, of course, in charge of the corrupt money that went into these presidential elections. That's why he is called in to do these things, because he has oppositional research called blackmail, even if it's made up, on everybody. Same thing that John Podesta and Tony Podesta have. John Podesta and Paul Manafort are the two lobbyists that are battling right now in Washington, D.C. They are being mitigated because of the nonsense of Comey to try to keep these things covered up, Podesta's Russian connections. So Comey went on the aggressive attack against Trump, saying he had Russian connections, which none have ever been found, and all the agencies have all said, including Liar Clapper, including Muslim John Brennan. Let's make clear who I'm talking about. Liar James Clapper, who almost every single time he comes on the airways tells a new lie in complete contradistinction to the prior lies that he's told. John Muslim Brennan, the previous head of the CIA, by the way, James Clapper was the previous head of the Office of National Intelligence, who pointed out that Hillary was lying in the presentations that she gave during the debate, saying 17 U.S. intelligence agencies all agree that the Russians hacked and meddled in the election and were supporting Donald Trump and that it was being led by Putin. Those are all lies now. We're not even looking at those lies anymore, those grotesque lies that were told at that time that were all staged by James Comey. Well, lobbyists are not like a James Comey. He works in the government sometimes like a Robert Mueller as a lawyer and as a fixer. And they fix for the presidencies, the different presidents that have been in the White House, because after a president's been in the White House since the time of basically George H.W. Bush, they afterwards become a mafia, essentially, kind of a CIA. And I say rogue CIA, but what CIA would stand for corporate imperialistic army.
Not Catholics in action.
Not Catholics in action, though they follow the Jesuits. They follow the Jesuit plan and their subversion, their espionage, their horrible things, everything that they do. I don't want to get into that. But the point is if you look into the criminal activities of past presidents since Bush Sr., you will see what really happened. George Bush Jr., he didn't even know anything was going on throughout his entire presidency, so he wasn't really culpable. He just did what Dick Cheney told him to do, and Dick Cheney, of course, took his orders directly from George Herbert W. Walker Bush, H.W. Bush, because that's what happens when you get that much power. And now, lobbyists or corporations. Manafort's going to be able to hide most of these accusations by simply corporate maneuvers that the CIA does with all 2,000 of their corporations. And that's who he learned it from. He's CIA indoctrinated to the hilt, just like Roger Stone was. Let's remember, Roger Stone was, he's like let's not get into Roger Stone too much because I'd have to say things about him that aren't very nice. But Roger Stone is, of course, the one who probably put in Trump's mind that Trump didn't want any lobbyists anywhere near him, his campaign, or anything else. Then why did he keep listening to Roger Stone? Well, he listened because Roger Stone actually broke him into the field and gave him some very good advice, which was terroristic advice. Attack your opponents, brand them, name them, and stomp them into the dust. That's what he did. That was Roger Stone's advice. Then Roger Stone was fired, and Trump hired Corey Lewandowski, who he never liked, and Roger Stone hated because of his aggressive jealousy that he was fired.
Now, how do you know all this stuff, Thomas?
They've all said these things.
I'm
using their own words.
Okay, just checking in.
I'm not making this up. You can look up any of this. This would be in Wikipedia, I would imagine. Okay? If you don't believe anything I say, first just look it up in Wikipedia. And what you're going to get there is the globalist version. You'd have to look with eyes of discernment to see the truth in Wikipedia because they often simply repeat the liberal, sorry to have to say it, democratic view because, why? The internet is controlled by those people in the military-industrial complex, which likes the Democrats because the Democrats make everybody go to sleep and spend a lot of money. Whereas the Republicans are saying, cut down on the federal government. And so get rid of lobbyists. What did Trump say?
These neocon globalist Republicans that are in Congress, they're globalists as much as globalist as the Democrats are.
They're rhinos, though, as you always point out.
Well, you can call them rhinos, neocons, globalists. I just call them scum.
Yes, because they're Republicans in name only. They're rhinos. They're not Republicans. John McCain is not a Republican. He's a Raytheon agent.
Yes.
Raytheon agent. And that they allow him to own stock in one of the major military-industrial complexes and sit on the Armed Services Committee and Appropriations Committee. This is collusion. I've said this 1,000 times, anyone who is a politician, a career politician, has an offshore account, whether it's in this country in Delaware or whether it's offshore. So lobbyists have massive offshore accounts. So this is now a battle. Because Trump said no lobbyists. Well, he used Roger Stone. And in the end, Corey was such a bad person running his campaign that again and again and again, Roger Stone came and said, look, you got to use Paul Manafort. You got to use Paul Manafort. Look, Paul Manafort's going to work for free. Do you understand who Paul Manafort is? Trump, you're not getting through the Electoral College without Paul Manafort. He is, don't forget, a terrorist lobbyist. He will come in and make mincemeat of the Electoral College if they do not follow the rules. And he did. And he brought his partner, who was always his shadow. Usually see Rick Gates walking right behind him. I mean, he's like his doppelganger, his own shadow. So poor Rick is caught up in the fact that for many, many years, the Podesta group, and now you see Tony Podesta, stepping down from the Podesta group and creating his own company the next day. They're not going to miss a heartbeat in making illegal money. Tony Podesta was paid by the Russians during the Obama administration as a lobbyist. He never filed. He was paid by the Ukrainians. He never filed. He was paid by the same group that they're saying Manafort was paid by, which Manafort did a lot of clever maneuvering around that group, the European Committee on Moderate Ukraine. There was only one person in the office. They had no money, and the money magically appeared in an offshore account in Cyprus that is controlled by Manafort, but in a clever way. And this is what they all do. They have agents who literally own these accounts, who move money around, and by the time it's done, Paul Manafort can say, none of that's my money. But he made a huge mistake, and I predicted this quite a long time ago. The minute that Mueller was appointed, I said, in contradistinction to others, that Mueller would go down. And I said it would be over real estate deals because of tax fraud, because he carried his money, he wired his money.
No, Manafort, not Mueller.
Oh, man, I do this every time.
Yeah.
I so want Robert Mueller in jail where he belongs.
I know. It's
with his bunk buddy, James Comey. I have the cell all picked out and the color and the... Yeah. And they're going to look good in orange.
Yeah.
I worked in prisons.
Okay, so imagine that I just cut that. Now start again.
Anyone paying any attention to lobbyists like Manafort knew that he'd been under investigation for 5 years. When a lobbyist goes over and works in Ukraine, as Manafort did, if he doesn't cover his work very carefully, make sure he pays taxes when he brings it back into this country, yes, he can go to jail, especially even if he does file under the FARA, the Foreign Agent Filing Act or whatever it is, which is what they're getting Tony Podesta for. And the reason he had to close his company, that's what they're getting Manafort for. So when we're talking about Podesta closed Podesta Group and the next day opened another one, Tony did. And John wants to say that the entire time he was working on the Hillary campaign, that he divorced himself from that group. Complete nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And so John himself should be prosecuted at the same time as Manafort. Now, yesterday I made a mistake. I had to go back and do some research because something was wrong with what I said. I said there has never been anyone ever they've been indicted, but not ever prosecuted and given a sentence for not filing as a foreign agent. That is incorrect. There was one person back in 1960s, I think, and the president pardoned that person. So no one ever was given a punishment. And again, don't forget.
So why even have the law in the book if nobody's going to be prosecuted for breaking it?
because the people who founded the overthrow of America, starting with Harry Dexter White and the Bretton Woods Agreement and the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, which Trump just busted the World Trade Organization and said, you guys are such frauds in the UN. We give you $1 billion a year and you don't give it to a single Christian. You only give it to Muslims. And I didn't use the horrible phrase, Islamic fascists, but that's who we're talking about. This is just draining America to feed our enemies so that chaos and confusion reign, because that's the only way that they're going to overthrow America. So we have to realize that we're in a second American Revolution. Trump is doing a great job, but he said from the beginning, no lobbyists. No lobbyists. Going back, he used Roger Stone, one of the top lobbyists. Who did Hillary Clinton use? Probably the top lobbyist. We'd have to say Manafort's probably the third or fourth because he's been working out of this country for years, and Roger Stone has kind of gone a bit over the cliff. So really, when it comes down to it, the top lobbyist in Washington, D.C., period, is John Podesta and his brother Tony and Podesta Group. So it's a war against the lobbyists. So Trump said he wouldn't use lobbyists. Now here's the sad news. Roger Stone kept hammering on Corey Lewandowski, saying he did such a bad job that the only way that Trump was going to get through the Electoral College is if he brought in his buddy, his partner in crime, one of the biggest opposition political groups opposition research political groups in Washington, D.C., and that would be Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort came in and got Trump the election. Trump would not have been elected. Trump was going to go down because the Electoral College was going to completely fall apart. That was the plan. George Soros said it. Others said it. It was on the news. All of them said it. Entire states said they wouldn't give a single vote, even though Trump had won that state. That would have ended it, and then we would have just gotten into complete chaos. Thank you, Paul Manafort, for coming in and doing that. Paul Manafort, I don't know whether he was ever paid, but I do know that he came to the Trump campaign and worked for free. And from April until May, I know he worked for free. And then from May to June, he took over in Corey's position, and Corey was, I think he was completely let go of, but anyway, Paul Manafort for 2 months, during the time that Trump had to get the Electoral College in line, because they were saying everywhere ahead of the election that they were not going to give their votes. There were hundreds of them stating that they were going to break the law because of their conscience. They were going to take a knee, and they weren't going to give their electoral vote. And in some states, it's actually legal to do that. It's just completely apolitical, a horrible thing to do. Manafort got that. As soon as Manafort got that, oh my, the other side got very, 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 very upset. So what did they do? And this is what is completely forgotten in all of this. I hope Trump hears this, or somebody tells him, and make sure to tweet this out. He fired Paul Manafort 2 days after the FBI came to him and said, there are 5 intelligence agency investigations on Paul Manafort for years before he came to your campaign. Bingo, Trump fired him. 2 days after the FBI came with their bogus charges that they had an investigation that they were beginning on Michael Flynn because of a miscommunication supposedly to Michael Pence and a supposed unmasked conversation which was never given to Trump, proving that Michael Flynn had said something about sanctions in speaking to a Russian. It could have been a Russian, any Russian. Literally, they ask during these indictments, they literally ask Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, and specifically George Papadopoulos, do you know anyone who speaks Russian? And he was going to be charged because of omission, that he didn't state something. Well, both Manafort, Rick Gates, and George Papadopoulos, and all of them, because Trump told them to cooperate with Mueller, none of them have taken the fifth, and they're going to use it against them because omission, you can omit the fact that the Russian lady you were talking to was wearing a red blazer. Well, that's an omission. Therefore, you can be put in jail because you're in a grand jury impanelment, which is supposed to be top secret.
How do you know that those questions were asked? If
they're in the indictment.
Oh, they're okay.
And remember, they gave 20,000 documents to Mueller, and in them were all of George Papadopoulos', all of Paul Manafort's, everyone's communication during the Trump team's run towards the presidency. They have all the evidence. They use that evidence against the people. And if they didn't remember some of the facts, and that's exactly what they did to George Papadopoulos, because he didn't answer some questions completely 100%, that's why he's being charged. They tried to leverage him since July when they arrested him and kept that quiet. Everything else has been leaked. But the one person they thought they were going to leverage and muscle into turning on Trump, but there's nothing to turn on because there's no evidence. There's nothing. They're talking about they put a wiretap on George Papadopoulos. So what? They could have put a wiretap on Melania Trump in bed next to Trump, Donald Trump, and it would still not give any Russian collusion because there is none. The only Russian collusion is Felix Sater, Comey's agent, who had been turned years before because he'd got into some horrible criminal activity, and he'd been a James Comey puppet. He is the one who arranged for the Russian lawyer, the female lawyer, to meet with Donald Trump, and Manafort was there, and the wiretapping of Manafort's phone. Even when your phone's off, they still wiretap it, folks. Just look into our documents. We've already proven all of that. So Manafort left the room, and so they didn't have the rest of the communications, but they had all the emails even before Jared gave them out, and Donald Trump Jr. gave out all the emails having to do that meeting. That was Felix Sater who set up that meeting. It was a Russian setup. And so since I'm so distracted on this, let me just get back. Let me finish this thing. George Papadopoulos says, okay, he's a young guy. He's the youngest man on Trump team. They show a picture of him sitting in the National Security Council. He didn't speak during that meeting. He came because he had told a campaign manager leader, probably Manafort, about getting a Russian connection to Putin. And basically Trump had said, yeah, I'd love to talk to Putin. But then when it was brought up by the big guns, Trump said, well, hell no, I'm not meeting with Putin until I meet with NATO. And so he never met with Putin. And so George Papadopoulos was, I say, completely me going out there, but I think I can demonstrate this, and it will be demonstrated if the truth comes out. And if George Papadopoulos isn't, he had to do a plea deal, so he's not going to be able to say too much, okay? And that's what they want, because he was set up again by Comey and by Felix Sater, because he was in England, his second assignment in his life. He's fresh out of college. He had worked for the Hudson Institute as a specialist in oil in Russia. So Trump had a whole crew of people, including Carter Page, who were oil specialists with Russia, because that's what the sanctions were all about. He was trying to understand. These people never spoke to Trump. Okay? So Felix Sater had someone called the Professor, who is never going to be identified. Notice they leak everything, but they call him the Professor. So the Professor basically pulls a sting, another Russian fake sting, just like with Franklin Foer and Slate Magazine. I also say that was Felix Sater who went there and gave Franklin Foer the money to do the fake Trump Tower server.
You mentioning him, I just want to bring to the listeners' attention that I have those videos posted below if you want to know more about what Thomas said on these things.
So poor George Papadopoulos, I was really carrying on yesterday and making a big joke of it, but I feel sorry for him because he's very naive. So he's in Italy doing something, and some professor meets him and says, oh, I know everyone in Russia, including Putin. I know every top official there is. And he goes, what? Hey, whoa, maybe that can get me somewhere. Matter of fact, it may not have been part of him being made part of the team, but it happened before he became part of the Trump team that he was approached, because that's what he did in England at the time, and he was in Italy, so he's approached by this mysterious man, this professor, who has no name, who has all the connections, and then never really met with the professor much after that, but the professor turned him on to a beautiful Russian woman who says she's that's right, relative of Vladimir Putin. Now, how excited do you think George Papadopoulos got? So he went back and reported this, and his seniors, his bosses, probably thought he was an idiot. And so he said, okay, then I can meet with the Russian ambassador in London. I'm in London, and I'm going to make this arrangement. And how about if, say, he probably referred to Carter Page and I. he didn't. That's not said because they don't want to bring Carter Page in because Carter Page is suing Yahoo News for defamation of character because of the Trump dossier. Mueller's not going to investigate Alexei Gubarev, who is suing over the Russian Trump dossier for defamation of character because he was named as the hacker of the DNC in the Russian Trump dossier. They're not going to interview the man stated in the Russian Trump dossier to be the hacker of the DNC, Alexei Gubarev, who has 2 lawsuits against Christopher Steele and Orbis Industrial LLC, or whatever it's called, Orbis, Christopher Steele and his guy. 2 guys in that company, fake company. Only a few people in Fusion GPS, front men, and they represent everybody evil you can think of. So when Fusion GPS went to the scumbags, XX, and when we say X, that means they are what I call CIA. They're corporate, imperialistic army. They're out for themselves. They're a corporation. Corporations have all kinds of ways of getting out of illegal activity. That's why we use corporate intelligence whenever we get in a bind. That's why when we when Brennan and Comey now admit that they wiretapped using the British Secret Service, using Fort Meade, Maryland, our home of our Secret Service, to wiretap Trump and his whole association since about April is what is probably the truth. About the same time that the DNC, when Eric Elias and Perkins Coie, the law firm, and John Podesta and Hillary's direct lawyer, Mark Elias, says that they started to pay in April for the dossier, and now everyone's assuming that all the money paid to Perkins Coie went to the dossier. And what I think is I'm coming back to George in a second, but what I think is horribly funny about the whole thing, the funniest thing of all, is that it bounded back on them. It rebounded. The Trump effect worked on the Trump dossier attack. Now it was used against Trump the entire election, and then after the election to try to impeach him, and then to try to impeach him afterwards, right up until the time Comey was fired. And now Mueller is picking up where Comey left off. So they're trying to impeach him with the Trump dossier. What's reversing? Now that they know that Podesta says he didn't pay the lawyer, he didn't look at any of that, and Hillary says, I didn't pay the lawyer, I didn't look at any of it, and then here's Mark Elias. Oh, well, what's he? Is he a spy? They're trying to use a lawyer firm to launder money, and now the accusation, which isn't true, but shh, don't tell anybody, the accusation that the DNC, that Hillary and Podesta, the Democratic National Committee, worked directly with those top officials in Russia that are not really named. Some are named, and some are dead now. And they love to use the dead ones as in the dossier. The second they get dead, then they appear in the dossier. And the dossier, remember, 17 installments, gets better every single installment until in the end they name Alexei Gubarev as the hacker of the DNC, and that's why Hillary lost the election. No, that's why they had to create a smokescreen. They had to have damage control. They had to create an anti-Trump Russian plan. And that's what Comey was doing with George Papadopoulos since March.
That's which year?
Of 2016. George Papadopoulos was a setup. They took the weakest link in the entire Trump team, the youngest person there, and set him up with a sting in Italy with a fake person saying he was Russia, and he believed it. He believed the girl the whole time was a relative of Putin's.
She was probably beautiful.
Oh, I'm sure he probably, had some fun, and made some money, and there's probably all kinds of money he saw in his mind that he was going to make by doing some oil deals with Trump once he got in office, and he was part of, some government position. He got an appointment. That's what everybody works and campaigns for, because they hope to get an appointment into a position they know nothing about, but where they can get money, just like Hunter Biden's dad. Joe Biden went to Ukraine and got Hunter on the largest oil company in Ukraine. So Hunter is now going to be a multimillionaire and maybe someday a billionaire. That's the way it works. It's placement. It's about who you know, the job you get. It's about the fact that Rod Rosenstein placed Robert Mueller there because Comey had already gone to Rod Rosenstein, the three amigos. That would be James Comey, Rod Rosenstein, and Robert Mueller. Those are the three amigos. They've been doing corrupt stuff since back before 9/11. Just look at their history. I'm telling you, read our intelligence and you'll get what is you can get from the whole internet. But literally, in some cases, just look up Mueller in Wikipedia. Why is that man allowed to even practice law in this country after what he has done? But anyway, the lobbyists are in a war. Trump said he was against the lobbyists. He allowed Manafort to come and work for him. Well, at the same time, Comey was setting up one sting after the next. And he was using Felix, a man whose dad is the mafia Russian boss of New York City. And he works for a man in Russia who I've said before, I won't say his name out loud because the last person who on the news said his name out loud, who was an oligarch in Russia, was shot dead in the street. So I won't say his name. But let's just say it doesn't get any worse. How did Felix get in with Trump? He was sent there by Comey after he had already become an agent for Comey, an asset for the CIA, and an agent for the FBI. This is well known. His case was put all over the news. If you don't know this, then you don't know who the key player is. He set up George Papadopoulos to believe this ridiculous story. And now Papadopoulos, through internet communication with top Russian officials, which anyone could prove that he didn't talk with any top Russian officials by simply analyzing through NSA, Vault 7 programs, his communication, they'd find, but he'll never do that. He's got a plea bargain. He now belongs to the court. That anytime you hear of a special counsel setting up a grand jury court, it is to indict someone illegally with a star witness who gets to testify in closed doors and never testifies in public. This is the standard way that's done. In more than half the cases, every one of those court cases is fake. Why? They use fake witnesses because they either make people turn and give fake evidence, as Andrew Weissman, the expert at that, whose cases are usually, in more than half the cases, he should be disbarred, by the way. He works for the Mueller team. He was the last one to come in so that he could bring the evidence he already had against Manafort that had been collected by him, Preet Bharara, and Eric Schneiderman, the current Attorney General of New York State. All three of them conspired to bring this case against Manafort. Will Manafort be charged? We could talk about that in a minute. But it was Comey who set up George Papadopoulos. But Papadopoulos was supposed to think he could create a contact. They wanted Trump to go to Russia first. That would have sunk Trump's boat. He wasn't stupid. Of course he's not going to align with Russia before he aligns with NATO. He was stirring up their everything, shaking the boat because Roger Stone told him to, because Paul Manafort told him the sneaky ways to get into office, because they've done it before over and over again, times that we know of and times we don't know of. Manafort did it for Yukhanovich, for the president of the region, the Party of Regions, who was the president twice in Ukraine, Yanukovych, and he helped him the first time, but Mueller's not going after that information. That's where the $75 million came from, the previous lobbying that was done by Manafort. So Trump made a huge error that got him into the presidency that he now has to live with, and that's that he allowed these criminals, against his own better judgment, when he said lobbyists should not be part of his administration, he allowed some to come in, and this is what he gets. All of Manafort's sins and crimes before he came to Trump. The minute Trump found out about it, he fired him 2 days afterwards.
Well, he probably knew about it all along.
No, he did not.
Really?
No. How could Trump, busy with making a multi-billion-dollar kingdom and a huge family, having a good time and ready to retire, having the world as his oyster, why would he be looking into the corruption that he knows was already there? He already said it was there. Back in 1996, he was already making remarks against the corruption he saw in our government. That's the reason people asked him to run for president. I think it was Ronald Reagan who met him and said, you know what? I think you'd make a good president. Ronald Reagan knew because he saw that Donald Trump had done the important things. He had mastered the capitalistic system. He had learned to use the right lawyers, and I'm not going to use any defamation remarks here, but you know who I'm talking about. Look at all of his lawyers. He uses the right lawyers who also represent who? All the criminals. That's why you use them, because law and the judges are all crooked, and if you don't get a crooked lawyer, you're just stupid. So he has done deals with how many countries and had no problems and won and won and won and won over and over and over and over again. He's a capitalist king. Then he said what? You fools in Hollywood, you're stupid. You're all stupid. I can do better than you. I can do it right here in my home. I don't even have to leave my house if I don't want to. And he did. And he continued to do so with The Apprentice and Celebrity Apprentice. He said before he started what he was going to do, and he did it. So he learned that the media controls politics. And when he realized that, he said, well, then I'm retired. I can do for the world what I did for my company. I'm clean as a whistle. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't carouse. I have all the beautiful women throwing themselves at me. I don't have to rape anybody. And the charges against him are all lies. Some of them are coming up again with all this sex stuff coming up. But if I should do a tape just on that, the criminal attacks against Trump were astounding. The woman who accused him and Jeffrey Epstein of raping him doesn't exist. She's back in the news again, trying it again under another name, admitting she did it the first time.
They're trying to find a way to take him down, and they just can't. They are running out of material. Look at John Kasich. He says he's going to step up and run for 2020. Honey, he couldn't even get through the primaries, but that's all they have.
All they have to show is the meme, John Kasich eating pancakes. No one would elect an animal like that.
Yes, well.
May I go on?
Yes, you may.
Okay, where was I? The attempts to take down Trump included not only the inside, crooked lawyers, some of his own lawyers, some of the lawyers he'd used before, lawyers who are... do you understand that Perkins Coie is also Obama's lawyer, and that Obama's group, his illegal group OFA, paid them almost $1 million just last year? Why did a group have a lawyer that they paid $1 million? You want to know why? Because when Obama took his library and illegally connected it to the Michelle Obama Foundation, OFA, his 32,000 foot soldiers who have now become Antifa and Black Lives Matter, the ones out in the street, those are literally paid by the $10 million he had left in his campaign, which he then turned over to his OFA. So he's trying to say that he may run for an office again, and so he uses OFA as a not-for-profit, and of course George Soros donates to that, his foundation, his library. Silicon Valley gave him $2 billion. So he's already started a more criminal enterprise than the Clinton foundations and global initiatives, which we pointed out Uranium One through the Clinton Global Initiation Sustainable Growth Foundation. He and Frank Giustra, and by the way, I got corrected by one of the most brilliant people in the world, our friend, that it is pronounced Giustra because he's already had problems, legal problems with Giustra. So when Clinton and Giustra set up this foundation, they got a piece of all the they got a piece of the money coming out of Kazakhstan, uranium enriched 235. They got, believe this or not, this is astounding. They also got it when we sold it to the Russians. They got a piece because it had to go through that foundation, just like Daddy Bush set up the United States Enrichment Corporation to get a piece of the pie when he took the uranium-235 from the approximately, let me just give you an approximate amount, let me do this in my head, 46,000 decommissioned ICBMs from Russia, satellite countries. They had all that uranium, so George H.W. Bush said, we'll buy it. So they went in and bought it. He got a piece of it. He set up a company in between because the government was not allowed to do deals with Russia because they're our enemy. He took down Russia, USSR. He fleeced Russia, and then later he went back in and got the uranium. So make no mistake about it. Hillary is not going to be, and Obama is not going to be charged with selling the uranium to Russia, though any American would go out, they go out of their mind when they hear this. It's been going on since 1993. It was Bill Clinton who signed it into law. We took 50 tons of Russian uranium-235, brought it into this country, and supposedly used it for nuclear power plants, which is really very odd, seeing that we have thousands of missiles sitting there with uranium-235 that have yet to be taken apart and disassembled, as well as thousands of weapons sitting there that are not on pads ready to go. We have more uranium-235 than anybody could possibly ever need that we already used. In Tennessee, we created it, as well as we still have some enrichment companies. We don't need Russia to enrich it. We don't need their uranium. We can get it from Canada, the second biggest holder. We can get it from Australia, the first biggest holder. We did not need to go to Kazakhstan and rip them off through George Bush Sr., through that company, the United States Enrichment Corporation. We did not need to rip America off by selling it again to Russia in America, in Wyoming, 20%, and people say it's not good uranium. In 2016, it provided 11% of the uranium in America used in nuclear facilities.
Well, with everybody making money off of this uranium stuff, is this maybe why nobody's talking about thorium?
Yes, and thorium is the answer. And look on Truth News headlines, and you'll see that is the answer for the future. We never needed uranium, except for weapons.
Well, they do, because they're making a lot of money off of this.
There's only one need for uranium, and that is plutonium 239, which is in weapons. Mm-hmm. So the ex-presidents always get their piece of the pie. Now, who was it that made sure that we bought uranium? That would be Tony Podesta. I think he was paid $130,000 or $180,000 to represent Uranium One. He went into the White House during the Obama administration 114 times, special access through his brother, John Podesta, who was, of course, chief advisor and the person who basically gave the list of most of the appointees, not only for Obama, but for the two previous administrations before that, Republican included. John Podesta is the kingmaker. He is the one who decides who gets jobs because he's the one who has the dirt on them. He's a lobbyist. He's worse than the CIA. He's a treasonous American parading as a top American, and that's what lobbyists do. They're liars. And sorry, Paul Manafort, you're a liar too. And it doesn't matter. Of course Paul Manafort stole money. They could have got Paul Manafort many, many years ago for all of his corruption. They're only doing it now as a distraction. And as we said yesterday, yes, Paul Manafort sat with Comey and Robert Mueller. I will bet a clipping from my toenail that they sat together and determined exactly what plea bargain Manafort would get, what would come out, what would not come out, and how they would make it look really bad. And they saved it for the exact moment they need when literally all of them were part of the Uranium One deal. Tony Podesta, as well as the uranium. Okay, it gets so complicated. These lobbyists create so many companies. Mercury LLC is another company for Manafort. Manafort DMI, and then Manafort DNC, and then Manafort blum, 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 blum. Manafort's got so many companies, you can't keep track. He had to divorce himself from Roger Stone because he was getting too far out there. He didn't hardly work with the old Stone Kelly Manafort, or Stone Black Kelly Manafort, whatever it is. That group, which was the opposition to Fusion and Podesta. Podesta and Fusion. You see, when Podesta wants to get something and control another country, they simply use Fusion, because what's Fusion? They're yellow journalists. They make up wars on news through news articles. So they use Glenn Simpson and his three guys who are all corrupt from the Wall Street Journal, and they simply pay them whatever to write whatever they need so that it will fit their agenda. Remember, Podesta said in December 13th, 2015, in a WikiLeaks email, "We have been breached twice. We need to cover ourselves. We need to create a plan," because also he had said 2 weeks before that their weakest point was that Hillary's connection with Uranium One and the Russians and her payoff through all the different companies, especially through Frank Justra and the people who sat on Eurasia One and sat on the board of Uranium One and sat on other boards and were literally Kremlin tied, who then donated to her. I am now told, and corrected again by my genius friend, that it was not $145 million. It was $152 million if you count the money that were the kickbacks from, as I was yelling a minute ago. Not only did Clinton get money coming out of Kazakhstan, he then got money when he sold it, when Hillary helped Obama sell it to the Russians, but then it had to go to Canada to be enriched. And so when it went there, Frank Justra got his piece of the pie, and then they stole some of it and sent it to Russian oligarchs from Canada. Then they sent part of it back to America because, who knows? They take away, when you take away uranium, only 4% of the ground that you take becomes enriched uranium. So nobody knows. This is just simply a game with enriched uranium. So they send back some to America, and then the Russian oligarch that was here that was charged by Rod Rosenstein, who was the man from the Justice Department, the Attorney General from the Justice Department that handled that case and never brought it to Obama's attention, supposedly. That's a lie. Never brought it to his boss's attention, Comey. That's a lie. Never brought it to his mentor, Robert Mueller. That's a lie. Never brought it to CFIUS. That's a lie. Never brought it to Homeland Security. All of them were involved with votes. Obama had the veto vote from the CFIUS committee. He had the veto vote for all the three committees that allowed not only for it to be sold, but to be transported to Canada, to be enriched, to be brought back enriched into this country, to allow a foreign country, a man, what's his name, Vadim Mikorin, ran this company as a Russian oligarch inside of America for 8 years, using normal Russian mafia techniques of extortion, blackmail. What he would do was he would sell to a company very nicely, and he used a fake company where he didn't meet any of the requirements to move this uranium around the country from Canada to these nuclear power plants in Paducah, Kentucky. That was the other man who was charged. They don't give out his name. Why? Because what he did is so illegal. He has to go to jail for the rest of his life and more. But they're not even going to say what they did with his charge. So they put Vadim in jail for 48 months. Why? Because he went to nuclear power plants, said to their corporate owners, that's right, folks, we don't own those power plants, and just like Fukushima, any of them could have a China syndrome and melt down. So we don't own those. We just control them through a government regulating agency that really doesn't do their job.
Through
That's
a corrupt regulatory body.
So horribly corrupt. They don't even have a single solution for the nuclear waste, but they continue on in a maddening pace.
They're making money.
Even buying uranium from our enemies. During the Cold War, when 7,000 ICBMs, some with MIRVs on them, aimed at Russia and America, were playing games with uranium-235, allowing Russian oligarchs to come in here and manipulate. They blackmailed the people. They sold it to them the first time. They said, hey, this is great stuff. Good price. Like any Russian mafia good oligarch, he comes back the next time and says, here's pictures of you with your girlfriend. The price has gone double now. And that's what he did. And they allowed him to do this. The FBI knew this was going on for 8 years, and at the same time allowed 10 Russian spies to come in and infiltrate almost every branch of our government. One of them said they were 1 inch away from being directly connected to Hillary Clinton. Only after 8 years did they collect up this Russian group and just send the Russian spies back, but, prosecute this guy, Vadim, and then make sure nobody knows about it. It was an accident. We even found out about that. The uranium deal wouldn't even be discussed. And when it comes out, as I said before, Tony Podesta lobbied for this. He did not file as a foreign agent. He lobbied for Ukraine. He lobbied for all kinds of things. And Fusion GPS, they haven't filed as foreign agents. They're lobbyists. They're huge lobbyists. They're the criminal lobbyists. They're the worst they are. They were just representing the CIA. And it was admitted. Remember when the CIA attacked Venezuela? Is anyone going to talk about that? No one even knows it happened, did you? There was a war started in Venezuela by the CIA that was kept hidden by Fusion GPS. That's what they don't want to know. That's what they don't want to be revealed on their bank statements. You will not believe who pays. Fusion GPS was mentioned in the Panama Papers. Many Russian oligarchs went down because of the Panama Papers. So if you think GPS isn't directly connected to every Russian oligarch they can get, you're crazy. Matter of fact, Manafort represented the Russians and didn't file. He represented the Ukrainians and didn't file. There were sanctions on Ukraine. There were sanctions on Russia. Podesta, Fusion, and Manafort's group, Manafort, whatever it is, LLC or whatever, the DNI or whatever it is, they lobbied ferociously to make sure that Uranium One happened. That's the reason the people on those committees said, I do whatever lobbyists say. So Trump said, down with the lobbyists. Had he stuck to his guns, he wouldn't have this problem. But this isn't a problem. Just like everything Trump does, he follows his gut and it turns out beautiful. He is now taking down the secret corporate intelligence groups. They're falling like dominoes. We will probably see Fusion GPS go belly up. There has to be an investigation of Fusion GPS now. Because if they won't reveal their records to a congressional committee, they're doing something illegal.
They say they will, but it's all going to be behind closed doors. And I'm saying, well, what good does that do? Probably, I don't know who's all on that committee, but they're probably just has been blackmailed just as much as everybody else. So they're not going to leak it out. And so the game continues.
It's a stupid game. Here's how stupid it is. Fusion GPS, most of their customers are international. Therefore, you don't have to get a FISA warrant. Therefore, they're automatically surveilled. Therefore, the Treasury Intelligence Department knows everything GPS does and has their bank records. And it is a lie, an absolute bold-faced lie. And GPS knows it's a lie, and they're playing a game. Of course, they can seize their records. This is international security issues.
Oh yeah,
this is the biggest attack.
They always pull on us.
This is the biggest attack on U.S. democracy, on the Republic, on the Constitution, on the Bill of Rights that has ever overtly happened. But now it didn't overtly happen. It's because of the Trump effect that it has become overt. And so now we're seeing Manafort's group. Oh no, all those companies are going to just disappear. Okay, Podesta Group disappear. I predict the Fusion GPS will disappear, or they'll do their standard thing. They'll empty it except for one secretary, and then they'll all claim their corporate rights. They'll plead the fifth for a corporation. Now listen to this. Because of the stacked U.S. Supreme Court, corporations have the same rights as individuals, so they can plead the fifth. They can rip off America, they can bomb America, and you go to sue a corporation, and they have all the rights of a human, and they can simply leave the country. They cannot pay taxes. They can have offshore accounts. They can have offshore accounts in America. Why? Because of this horrible U.S. Supreme Court ruling that said corporations now rule.
What about some solutions for us here, Thomas? You're so brilliant.
Oh, the solutions are happening.
What are some solutions?
They're happening. We're seeing the unraveling. We're seeing the collapse of the deep state or of the Washington swamp, or whatever you want to call it. I'll call it more specifically because I don't like to use monikers. I will call it, you will see the end. First off, a lot is going to happen that people don't understand. It's going to go to both sides. This isn't a Democratic-Republican thing. There is no more Democratic-Republican Party. You know why? Because Bernie Sanders is going to run for 2020. That guarantees the Democrats can't win. That guarantees Trump will win. Thank you very much, Bernie. I don't know why you're doing this except for your own personal greed, seeing that you weren't a socialist before. One day you just became a socialist. But you know that only a socialist can win in this country because how many people did they already find out? 5 million people voted who were illegal aliens? That's not going to happen in the future because Trump's here and he's bringing an agenda of lawfulness, not unlawfulness.
And they're cleaning up the voting records state by state.
Oh, what has already come out is hysterical.
And getting that wall built to keep illegals out, and especially those that vote in our elections.
Perfect example when Jill and Hill contested the election, went to 3 states, and by the 3rd state found out that it was so corrupt they stopped their claim that the election was rigged. Well, they had found out the election was rigged. Why did they stop when they found out? Because it was rigged for the Democrats. They came to Michigan. That was a big mistake. They went to Detroit. That was a big mistake. It ended. That was the Trump effect, you see.
Yeah, that was the last time we heard anything about that.
George Soros. Does everyone not... First off, who ever heard of George Soros before the U.S. presidential election? Only people like us. Now everybody knows. Anytime any organization from ACLU to the Center for Poverty Law, whatever it's called, to whatever, any of the 184 NGOs, and now there's even more of them because George Soros just gave $18 billion to the Open Society Foundation. It filters it to another foundation, just like all good offshore hedge funders, until it comes back through the Ford Foundation and this foundation, and then it reaches its 184 groups. And who writes the agenda for those 184 groups? That would be George Soros. So we have, there is a petition, 80,000 people have signed it. When 100,000 people sign it, it goes to Trump saying you must declare George Soros a domestic terrorist.
I don't think we need to have 100,000 signatures. I don't think we need to have 2 signatures on these stupid petitions. We just need to have law and order. And if we've shown that the history of these illegal activities, where is the Department of Justice in rounding these folks up with indictments?
Eric Holder could go to jail.
Loretta deal.
Lynch.
They all need to go. We've got plenty of FEMA camps.
Loretta Lynch can go to jail.
Yes.
Valerie Jarrett
Go to jail,
can go
girl.
to jail. Obama can go to jail. These people, we've never heard this before.
They all are corrupt, and they are enemies of the state.
When we knew that baby Bush was complicit with 9/11, when we knew that it was not Al-Qaeda because it was Rumsfeld himself that created Al-Qaeda. Don't forget that. When we knew the crimes of Obama, when we knew the crimes of Herbert Walker Bush, when we knew the crimes of Clinton, did anything happen to them? No. But now we are seeing the top law enforcement agencies crumble. People are discussing completely snuffing out the current Department of Justice and starting over, snuffing out the CIA, snuffing out the FBI. They all serve the executive branch. People forget this. Comey was an underling of the president. He can tell Comey what to investigate. If the president says or writes, if he says in a public forum or writes that someone should be investigation, that is a direct order to Comey. Comey ignored that. Comey lied under oath saying he was investigating the president. There was no investigation. There was a counterintelligence investigation on the Trump dossier. That is now known. It was started by John Brennan. Listen to his testimony. He admits it. He gave it to Comey. Comey went crazy because Comey had already started the sting on George Papadopoulos, the sting on Donald Jr. in the Trump Towers with the Russian lawyer, the sting with Franklin Foer's fake server in the Trump Towers, the sting with telling Trump by putting it on the front page of newspapers that he had been wiretapped. That was a release of Comey. Why? Because Comey was supposed to do all these things in October, but we know that back in December, he met with Obama and Hillary and Podesta in the White House and offered to do a New York op-ed putting Trump down, saying he was bad. When that was put down, he then did an FBI investigation. Unfortunately, that investigation found nothing for him or on Trump's dad. Completely clean of any Russian connection. That was put on the FBI site. It was only up for a few weeks. Then he did the Felix Sater trying to take... People don't even know about this one. This will probably come out eventually. Felix Sater took... and it's hysterically funny. Felix Sater took Ivanka and Jared to Moscow, walked around and told them that he knows Putin and that they just need to choose a site for Trump Towers in Moscow. Later, they knew that it was all BS, but they went with him. He took them to Crimea. I forget how much, $1 million he spent lobbying in Crimea to put a Trump Towers in Crimea. Russia attacked Crimea. According to what the news says, no, Crimea voted to have Russia come back. Georgia and the 2 provinces in Ukraine. That's what this is all about. Russia's getting back the countries and the resources that George Bush and the Vulcans and the presidents, the rogue CIA presidents, have basically stolen from the Russians. Putin's fighting for his life to get back the wealth of Russia. That's what's really going on. So the battle, folks, is that Comey was doing the corrupt activity from inside of the government. The lobbyists were working as hard as they could on both sides to put Trump up and to take Trump down. The Atlantic Council, through Alexandra Chalupa, had created the fake Manafort $27 million ledgers that was blasted out of the water within weeks of it coming to light. She is the person behind a lot of this. When the Russian connections, I'm sorry when I had to whisper the truth that really there were no Russian connections. Christopher Steele has no connections in Russia anymore. That's a well-known fact. And he's basically a disgraced, pathetic, truly pathetic spy. So he used Alexandra Chalupa. She probably made all that stuff up because she is a Russian. When you say Ukrainian, what are you going to say? Russian, Ukrainian? And the last thing I want to say is this. The evil in America is because lobbyists are dual citizens and because the people who donate to the Republican and the Democratic Party are dual citizens. Leonid Blavatnik, one of the richest men sitting on the richest board in Russia, Gazprom, he basically is second only to Putin in that domain. Well, he came to Britain. That's where he was laundering his money and he went to London and he started buying up, billions of dollars worth of stuff. And he became a a citizen, supposedly, of England? Oh, then, because we're not going to check him because he's a British citizen, he became a U.S. citizen. So this Russian, one of the most powerful Russians to this day, most concerned with U.S. sanctions, would kill, usually, would kill people over the hundreds of billions of dollars being played with by Obama's stupid sanctions because of Russian meddling that never happened, or stupid, it's been proven by the 17 U.S. intelligence communities that the Russian meddling was through RT by putting out ads on Facebook. That is so pathetic. That's what their first assessment said. Read it, folks. Millions and millions, 147 people created that first report, according to James Clapper. That report, the first assessment on Russian meddling, why is it being ignored? Why was the second one being ignored? Why did they spend tens of millions on the first one, tens of millions on the second one? And God only knows how much money Robert Mueller is spending on this fake third one, which has already been decided between Comey and Robert Mueller and Paul Manafort. They are best of buddies. Remember, Paul Manafort's lawyer firm is WilmerHale, the very company that Robert Mueller was working for as a corrupt lawyer before he became special counsel, and he brought 5 or 6 of his people from WilmerHale. Simply because of that, the entire thing is fake. This is an accident, what is happening. They thought, and we said this from the beginning, they're going to come in, they're going to get Manafort and some low-hanging fruit, and they still will go after Flynn. They'll go after anybody who didn't file their FARA as a foreign agent forms. Okay? Why? Because it makes, look, Mueller's doing a great job. Mueller is hiding the real evidence. That's his only job. He's only going to go after Manafort. Manafort's probably going to plea down or expect to get a pardon from Trump. I doubt he will. Or Manafort can do one of 1,000 things. The charges on Manafort should not stick. Who has ever been convicted of conspiracy against the United States in double counts, along with 10 other counts? What are they going to do? They're not going to get the first counts. The reason the first counts are conspiracy is because Manafort will get off simply for that. Plus, remember, what did they go into Manafort's house with guns drawn to do? To get the attorney-client privileged WilmerHale notes that they knew were in the house. They knew where they were because they talked to Manafort's lawyer, and they knew that. So they went to Manafort and said, look, we can get him from Manafort, we can get him from WilmerHale, or we can get him from you.
He probably said, well, I need it all staged so it looks like you took them.
That's when they made the plan.
So that was a little bit more theater.
That's when they made the plan. And don't forget what I said yesterday. I predict that it will eventually be known that James Comey was paid at least $100 million in offshore accounts to become the head of the FBI to cover up the crimes that had already happened, to continue covering up the crimes that Robert Mueller had covered up for 13 years, and to make Hillary the queen, not the president. We would not have a republic anymore. There would be no democracy in America if Hillary Clinton had become president. But right now, lobbyists, lawyers, the corrupt CIA, the corrupt FBI, the corrupt DOJ are all unraveling. They're all falling apart because of the Trump effect. Hallelujah that Trump is leading the Second American Revolution.